following is a Drop D podcast production.
Darkmyths.org and the Opulence Media Group proudly present to you the Lone Gunman Podcast, featuring your host, Rob Clark, where research comes to shine and myths come to die. Stay tuned. Be right there.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Lone Gunman Podcast. This is episode number 151, and back on the show is my guest, my special guest, Mr. X, who was kind enough to join me last week. He's back this week. We're going to continue the story, continue the narrative. We laid out the global groundwork for you last week, so I would encourage everyone, if you did not listen to last week's show, go back and listen to it first before listening to this one, because we're going to continue our arcing narrative through the process of the Kennedy assassination and those involved and associated with it. That being said, I wanted to say this real quick before we get to Mr. X. I know a lot of people have been hearing ads on the shows. I decided to monetize the podcast in order to offset some of the costs to keep the shows alive and out there for everyone to enjoy. Even if I don't ever podcast another show again, I wanted to at least keep the shows alive and on the internet and searchable and findable for as long as possible. I've been on a blitz to get them all onto YouTube. Even if that happens, they'll at least be somewhere. So if you hear ads throughout the show, that's what it is. Just they're 15, 20 seconds long. Pay them no mind. They help pay the bills. So with that being said, let's get right back into my guest here, Mr. X, joining me again. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back on.
No problem at all. I mean, I'm digging this. I love thinking that is outside of the proverbial box when it comes to the assassination. And we're going to talk a little about one of the guys that I've had my eye on for a while, and that's Larry Craver. But before we get into Craver and go to Dallas, I wanted to start our conversation off in New Orleans and some of the ties that are there with some of these guys like David Ferry, Clay Shaw, Marcello, and let's lay the groundwork there, and then we'll move on to Dallas a little bit, okay?
Sure.
All right. Start us off in New Orleans, Mr. X.
Okay, so New Orleans, there's so much to talk about. It's hard to know really where to begin. So I'll take it back as far as I can, and we'll talk a little bit about Clay Shaw, who was recruited into the OSS during World War II. He was basically a CIA man his whole adult life. He was connected to, he's been on the board of directors at Permindex, which is what was it? The World Trade? It wasn't the World Trade Center. It was the Trade Mart. So the building,
International Trade Mart there. Yeah. Right.
So the building that Kennedy was en route to when he was shot was the Dallas Trade Mart, and that building was owned by Permindex. Most people don't realize that, but yes, that building was owned by Permindex. Clay Shaw had a bunch of aliases, and he did a lot of work in New York. He went to Columbia University at the same time George de Mohrenschildt did. He was definitely connected to George de Mohrenschildt. George de Mohrenschildt is probably the most central person in the entire assassination. He is connected to everyone. He's connected directly to the Kennedys. Jackie Kennedy used to call him Uncle George. He is connected to he's connected to Hunt. He is connected to the FBI through Hosty. Hosty investigated him in the 1950s. He's obviously connected to Oswald and the Paynes and George Bush. And one of his first jobs in the oil biz down in Texas was for Humble Oil, which is where he got connected to Prescott Bush and Jack Valenti and these guys. And he had an ongoing personal relationship with Lyndon Johnson as well. So it is hard to find somebody in the Kennedy assassination who isn't directly connected to George de Mohrenschildt. Now, and as far as New Orleans goes, I have not really seen a whole lot of him going to New Orleans other than a reference to a meeting that he had that's in the FBI files. I don't recall the gentleman's name, but Garrison thought this guy was Arcacha Smith, but based on the descriptions, it was most likely de Mohrenschildt meeting with Clay Shaw in New Orleans. So I don't have any more information to present on that. It's one of the many things on my to-do list. But he was definitely connected to probably every single character. He was connected to the mob through a lawyer in New York named Mario Brod, B-R-O-D. And Mario Brod, some speculated that he was mob before he got into intelligence. Others say he was intelligence and infiltrated the mob, which is very unlikely. It was probably just a mutual relationship the entire time. But Brod was connected to a guy named Herbert Itkin. And Itkin was just he was just an informant. He would give him information when he got it on various things. But his initial handler was a guy named Philip Harbin. And Philip Harbin, the CIA and the CIA documents, I mean, I think that half their internal documents are just, fake for the public to see eventually, because these guys know who they're working with. They know who's who, but yet they send around internal documents that are like, who's this guy? Do we know who this is? Does he work for us? Nope, doesn't work for us, right? So they know who Philip Harbin is. And there's a mention that Philip Harbin was an alias for Phil Horton. And so you have Itkin, who was spoken to either by the FBI or, the HSCA or one of these. I get it mixed up sometimes, but he identified Harbin as George de Mohrenschildt. And so George de Mohrenschildt was connected to the mob through this relationship with Mario Brod. So that's just another area that he's connected. Now, in New Orleans, it's very interesting because Oswald was born in New Orleans, allegedly. Like I said, I don't even know if Oswald's a real person at this point in time anymore. It could have been 7 or 8 Oswalds, who knows? But according to the
guys we think was Oswald.
Yeah, definitely. So we know Oswald was impersonated down there, or that name was used by Kerry Thornley in New Orleans. The Perry Russo story about Oswald being at Clay Shaw's. I mean, that was most likely. It was definitely not Oswald, but it was probably Kerry Thornley who that was. But Oswald had an uncle named Moret who was working for Carlos Marcello, and he also had a first cousin whose name was, I always forget her first name, but it's Dorothea Moret. And she, Dorothy is her middle name. She was a false defector also. Most people don't ever talk about her. She was traveling. She was very young, traveling the world, going to weird countries in the Eastern Bloc. And she spent time in the Soviet Union, didn't actually defect, but she was absolutely connected to the CIA and being sent around the world. Who knows, maybe as a scout for future defectors, who knows? But she was connected to the mob through her uncle, I believe. Moret was also her uncle, or there's some details I'm just hazy on, but the connection was there to the mob. The connection was there to the CIA. So you can see the saturation.
It was her father.
Was it her father?
I think first name was Marion, possibly, if I'm remembering correctly.
Possibly. Yes, I have a slide on it. I'll figure it out, but so that CIA connection was there in the family from the very beginning, right? And then to sidetrack just a little, you've got the 2 Marguerite Oswalds, one that's got a mole on her face, the other one that doesn't. One's kind of short and squat, and the other one's a little bit taller and thin. One wore glasses, one didn't. We have work histories for both of them. So there's some CIA activity going on there, and that's before Oswald is in the picture whatsoever. From the time he was like 5 or 6 years old, they started to have this dual record of him. Right. And you've got, who is it, Jack Armstrong? Is that his name, who did the Harvey and Lee stuff? I don't really follow a lot of his conclusions. There were many people impersonating Oswald. That didn't necessarily have to be one specific person like he claims it was. And the person that he claims is this Lee Oswald, I believe, was just William Seymour. But I believe he makes different references to different people as being this Lee. Like Harvey was the good guy, Lee was the bad guy, something like that. His conclusions are a little far-fetched because there were multiple people using that identity. So,
right. John Armstrong was his name. John Armstrong.
You're on a sidetrack on another thing. Like, I'm really kind of frustrated at how many JFK researchers have the same name as people who are legit guilty in the investigation. It's really quite frustrating to me. Jack White, Richard Bartholomew. I mean, there's at least a half a dozen guys who are JFK researchers who, when you Google that name, their stuff comes up and not the bad guy who you're really researching. Right. To me, that's just more spycraft crap that they're, dumping on us. So yeah, New Orleans, there's a lot of directions to go with New Orleans. You've got the Lake Pontchartrain stuff, and you've got go ahead. I
was going to say, let's start with David Ferry.
So David Ferry is he is an intriguing guy, and like Garrison said, probably one of the more important people in American history. So let's start with the connection between Oswald and David Ferry with the Civil Air Patrol. So first off, Civil Air Patrol was in part founded by was his D.L. Byrd? Is that his name? Or H.D. Byrd, something like that. Byrd, who was the owner of the book depository, right?
D.L. Byrd, yep.
D.L. Byrd. You got the connection there as a founder of the Civil Air Patrol and the book depository, and both of these were CIA operations. So the Civil Air Patrol was basically a front for multiple things. The Civil Air Patrol, number one, it was recruitment for CIA. Number two, it was a nexus of child trafficking. It was also played a pivotal role in the CIA's drug smuggling operations, and just prostitution, human trafficking in general. Because these guys, under the guise of, Civil Air Patrol, they had a little place on the airport that they could go to and they could utilize, and they had this network across the country. And so at any given time, they could be at the airport, getting in a plane and hopping on a plane and just say, oh, it was Civil Air Patrol duty. But when in reality, they were moving drugs, weapons, and people around. I'm going to side reference here the skating rinks. The skating rinks.
Real quick before you get there, just an interesting side note: the Civil Air Patrol offices were in the same building as the International Trade Mart in New Orleans that Clay Shaw was president of. So there's a interesting tidbit, and David Ferry was seen many times in the offices of Clay Shaw, according to various witnesses.
Right. A lot of times that's how fronts work. A front will basically give you an opportunity to be in the same building but have a plausible deniability. Like, people need to understand plausible deniability is what causes these guys to do 90% of the spycraft stuff they do. So they can say, nope, wasn't me, Like, if you look at Dealey Plaza, you got a half a dozen people that all you ever see is a camera up to their face. Like, that's spycraft stuff to block your face from being recognized, So this spycraft stuff is all over the place, and it's saturated into our society and culture. It's really sickening. But yeah, so these fronts were used for criminal purposes, and the government was in on it because they've always been in on it. The government is the upper echelon of organized crime, and then above that, what do you got? You got the guys who run the central banks, who control the secret societies, who control the governments. I don't get into the secret society stuff because to me that's just nothing more than a recruiting mechanism and a regional information center. They're all working together pretty much. I mean, and there you have factions as well, but like, I don't get off into the Masons and all this stuff. To me, they're just varying ways of recruiting and seeing who you're working with,
Right.
So, so David Ferry is very central also. There's a couple things I'm unclear of. One thing I spent a lot of time on was the Gaveston Trip, which there's so much conflicting information there. I'm still having a hard time sorting it out, but the nuts and bolts of it are that the Gaveston Trip was not to go ice skating, or it was not to go duck hunting or any of that stuff. The purpose of going to ice skating rinks, from what I can tell, is that you can go there with teenagers and not look out of place, right? So Alvin Beaubouf, in one of his interviews, said that he initially met Ferry at a skating rink, right? And skating rinks come up pretty frequently in the questioning by the House Committee on Assassinations, but they never really dig into why. But the skating rinks, you could go and you could hand kids off to another person there and not look out of place. Those were places that there aren't many places you can go with kids and not look out of place, right? If you don't look like a parent. So that was a good cover for swapping out kids. And they were definitely involved in child sex trafficking. All these guys who were seemingly in on it, like Bo Boof and all these other guys, Breck Wall, they all seem like they were recruited at very young ages. 14, 15 were in the Civil Air Patrol. And then they go on to, assist on a lower level with the Kennedy assassination. There's, and that just kind of tells me that there's some of this weird MK Ultra stuff going on, because Ferry was a hypnotist, and there were at least 3 different hypnotists who worked at the Carousel Club doing a show. All that's. There were tons of books on hypnotism at David Ferry's apartment when he died. So all this stuff connects here. But the Gaveston trip has really been a kind of thorn on my side, because fundamentally what happened was people who were involved in the assassination got driven down, allegedly by Breck Wall, but his testimony is confusing and his times are not right. So it might not have been him. It might have been somebody who was using his name, or, the phone call from Jack Ruby to Gaveston. I don't think that was real. I think Jack Ruby was already in Gaveston. So the run from David Ferry from New Orleans, and he makes a bunch of stops in like Vinton and a couple other places along the way. This, I believe, was just to shuffle people around, people who were involved in the assassination who needed to get out of Dallas. I believe Jack Ruby was in Galveston and needed a ride back. We already talked about this before on the phone. Like it was a Jack Ruby double. The person who was photographed at the Dallas Police Department in the hallway, who everyone says is Jack Ruby, is definitely not Jack Ruby. I just started to look into Oswald's shooting this week, and there's a really good chance that it wasn't even Jack Ruby who pulled the trigger on Oswald. So you had a Jack Ruby double around, and maybe there was a swap. Maybe they had to bring that guy left Dallas, and they brought Jack Ruby back to Dallas on the way home. But that was a person shuffling thing, and I don't even believe that Alvin Boboof and Melvin Coffey were even on the trip to Galveston. I think he went there. He says he left there with 2 people, but I believe more he went and picked 2 people up and brought them back to New Orleans, and their descriptions look identical to these guys. Like if you look at every single one of these guys that they had recruited, was in the Civil Air Patrol. They're all they're very thin. They weigh like 130 to 150 pounds, brown hair, all the same features, and you could very easily have a witness give a description of somebody, and it just matches the person who they said they were with when they really weren't. So lots of spycraft stuff going on there. I can tell you that Robert McEwen, a.k.a. Thomas J. McKenna, was in Dallas on the 22nd of November. I haven't figured out exactly what his role is, because I only found one reference in one FBI report that a witness claims they saw him in a car with another individual. I'm still trying to track that down. Some of the stuff is buried so deep it's hard to really find. But that's pretty much what I think happened in Galveston. One thing I can't figure out is they made a stop at David Ferry said they made a stop at the manned space station, and they looked around there, but they were there at like 11 o'clock at night. Like that doesn't make sense. Now I've read a couple references that Melvin Coffey is actually the alias for Michael Payne. A witness had come forward and given testimony that he had worked at some kind of engineering place that was connected to the government, and that he knew Michael Payne as Melvin Coffey. Or something like Charles Melvin Coffey. So maybe the stop at the manned space station had something to do with Michael Payne, who was working for basically Bell Helicopter. He was the stepson of the founder of Bell Helicopter. And if people didn't realize, the only reasons we were in Vietnam were for heroin and helicopter sales. Pretty much, it's called the War of Helicopters and Heroin. And Michael Payne was right in the middle of it. So, but yeah, there's a lot of questions I still have about Galveston and who switched when and where. There was a blonde woman that was seen with them at the hotel in Galveston. So that I still need to do a ton of research on. And that trip is directly connected to assassins or people who were part of the assassination team leaving Dallas, because basically you've got at least 7-8 people with rifles in Dallas, but you've only got 3 or 4 shooters. Not all of them shot. You have 2 shooters on the knoll. One of them didn't shoot. So you have way more people who were involved who needed to get out than there were actually shooters. So it can be a little difficult in deciphering which of the guys shot and which didn't. I mean, because in Dealey Plaza we had, Dave Yaris, Lenny Patrick, Milwaukee Phil. And the proof of the connections here is Marshall Caifano connected to Richard Kane, and then you've got Jim Braden. So you've got right there five, 6 guys, and who knows what their positions were, but they were definitely there on the hit team in Dallas that day. So I'm still working on deciphering locations, who was where, because then you've got Sergio Cacha Smith and you've got Emilio Santana, who were there also in Dealey Plaza.
Real quick, Mr. X, let me just insert real quick a mafia tie with David Ferry, alleged by Frank the Irishman Sheeran in the new Charles Brandt book, I Heard You Paint Houses. It's going to be a Netflix movie soon. This is allegedly about the guy who killed Jimmy Hoffa and disposed of his body. And the author of the book was interviewing Frank Sheeran, and basically told him, I'm not going anywhere near Dallas, Frank said to me in 1991. And but later, a couple years later, after certain people had passed away, it was alleged that he spoke about picking up a bag of rifles for Dallas from Tony Pro right. at the Genovese Hangout, Monty's restaurant in Brooklyn, and taken down to David Ferry. And, of course, we've all heard about the Carlos Marcello jailhouse tapes, as far as him having a role in Dallas, but it's just an interesting, thing that we've got, the mafia possibly with running these rifles down to Ferry, who then, makes this trip.
Yes. This is kind of key also. This connects to a couple things. So you have Russell Bufalino, who I don't remember if he was New York or Pennsylvania. He might have been Pennsylvania. Russell Bufalino was a boss.
Yeah, he was Philly.
Philly, yeah. Okay, so he's in tight with Angelo Bruno, who, man, I've got some theories on Angelo Bruno in this, so we're not going to have time to cover it today. But Angelo Bruno seems to not be necessarily central or key, but definitely in the loop here. But you got Russell Bufalino calls up Tony Provenzano. Tony Provenzano tells him go meet with our friend in New Jersey. Now, the friend in New Jersey will be key. I'm still trying to figure out who the friend in New Jersey is. There's a couple people it could be. Potentially Angelo DiCarlo was the top hitman guy up there, and he had coordinated a lot of stuff with weapons. So he says, go meet with our friend in New Jersey, pick up the bag of rifles. He picks up the bag of rifles. He goes and he meets with Frank Sheeran. Frank Sheeran takes the rifles, and he meets up with David Ferry in Baltimore. Now, these rifles were replacement rifles. The original set of rifles, which is a little bit more connected to Jimmy Hoffa directly. My knowledge on this incident I'm going to describe is not where it should be. I just know the basics. So there were 2 guys in jail at the time that all this happened in Dallas. And I think you can read about it. And I don't know, maybe it's the Fourth Tramp or one of those articles, but there were 2 guys in the Thunderbird who had already had rifles that they were moving from up there down to Dallas. And I guess they got in a police chase, crashed the car, and the car and the rifles were all seized. So they had to send replacement rifles. That's where the Frank Sheeran, Tony Provenzano story comes in. But these guys were in jail, and if you read, I think it was the Fourth Tramp, they talk about in it one of the guys with a smashed up face, and that was the driver of the car that wrecked in Dallas that had the initial guns. So also in the book, Oswald talked. That's right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of amazing those guys happened to be in jail at the same time that the Kennedy assassination went down. So we've got the rifles tracked up to Russell Bufalino and whoever the friend in New Jersey is. And let me see. From there,
thought it was alleged he dropped him in Baltimore to Ferry.
Yeah, and Ferry flew him back to wherever, assuming Dallas. Ferry did a lot of weird flights. witnesses had seen him in Houston the week before. Witnesses saw Jack Ruby in Houston the week before. Houston was really crucial. It was kind of like the center of the Texas oil business. George Bush and like all of his oil buddies, most of them live down in Houston, not Dallas. Houston and Galveston really become very, very important in figuring out what happened and seeing some of the connections in the Kennedy assassination. So, but yeah, the mob involvement is like it can't be disputed because so many people were like, oh, the mob couldn't do it. They couldn't get the CIA to or the FBI to overlook stuff, and they couldn't have put the Warren Commission together. Yeah, I mean, this is all one big organization we're talking about. It's always been one big organization, and there's just tiers of control, right?
Yeah, and the FBI overlooked the mafia for how many years and didn't?
Yeah.
I mean,
well, they had blackmail on Hoover, because him and Tolson were lovers for like 50 years, and everybody knew it, but nobody wanted to mess with him because he was kind of the man. He could send the whole federal government after you, So there's a balance of power, and that's how the balance of power in the world is maintained today. I mean, you really think Vladimir Putin doesn't know who did 9/11? I mean, like, this is all tools that they use in their manipulation games, right? So not much has really changed. But where to from here? What do you want to move on to next?
Well, let's move on to Dallas a little bit. I want to get into what originally sparked you to contact me, and let's talk a little bit about Larry Craver. I don't know if you got a chance to read a little bit of that article that I sent you.
I had a chance to skim it, but I have a little ADD, and I get so distracted. I'll start reading an article, and next thing you know, I'm like 10 web pages away from it, and I'm like, how did I end up here?
Yeah. We just got into a little bit about, Larry Craver's ties with the mafia on the West Coast and how he kind of moved and was maneuvered into place in Dallas, and just happened to meet up with Jack Ruby and this, that, and the other, and was probably the reason for a lot of these misidentified Lee Harvey Oswald sightings in Dallas.
Yeah, the misidentified Lee Harvey Oswald sightings really kind of perplexed me because none of these other guys look like him. They look similar, but that's when I started really discerning the language in these FBI reports. Because some people will outright say they saw Oswald, and other witnesses will say they saw someone who looked similar to Oswald, right? So I'm kind of being a little more discerning on how I interpret the actual writing, because before I used to just think, oh, Oswald was everywhere, but he obviously was not. But Larry Craver's an interesting guy. I mean, he was in the military, and that's like the recruiting point for CIA. So it was definitely CIA. One of the funniest things I have read yet was during the Warren Commission. Larry Craver was asked, what did you do in the Marines? And he goes, oh, I was an expert. I was a master sniper. And the next question they asked was, what kind of entertainment did they have at the club? I thought it was like the best deflection I've ever seen. Because if you're, investigating the assassination of a president with a rifle and your witness just tells you that he's a master sniper and you completely ignore the question, then I think that is very telling in and of itself. So,
yeah,
but Larry Craver,
real quick, Mr. Eck, I determined that quote is actually attributed to author and comedian Mort Saul, and was said to make a point as to how ridiculous the Warren Commission was. That Craver didn't actually say that, so I don't want to put any.
I thought I cut it right. I thought I cut it right from the his testimony.
No, it's a quote attributed to him, even on the education site. It's attributed to him, but it's not. It's actually something Mort Saul said in a speech or a talk that he given as to how ridiculous the Warren Commission was. But yeah,
that's interesting. That's interesting because I would have swore I took it right from the testimony. I'll have to double back on that one.
Because Craver was actually in the Army. He was stationed in Germany at the same time that General Walker was doing his right-wing propaganda and stuff over there. And he allegedly, at least from the article that Peter Whitney wrote, sent on several secret missions, whatever that means. And he was injured in his leg, and of course he has a scar on his face. But they didn't exactly say what he was doing over there.
Interesting. Well, the one thing that I think really connects him to the Tippit shooting and to all this is the jacket that was found in the back parking lot of the Abundant Life Temple. Now, I think that's the one thing that really links him to it, because inside the jacket was the dry cleaning tag, and that dry cleaning tag was traced back to Earl Ruby's dry cleaning facility that he had in Detroit. And the very next day, where did Larry Crawford disappear to? He went back to Detroit the day after the assassination, and at the time, Earl Ruby was in Detroit. And so,
well, he went back to Michigan. He had a sister or something to that effect in Michigan. I'm not sure if it was actually in Detroit or not. I would have to double check. It's been a while.
When I say Detroit, that was where their home base was, because that was where the mafia was. He was associated with the Detroit mafia, and he might have lived outside of Detroit or whatever, but it was all part of that Detroit mafia organization.
Right.
And so we had a conversation about George Senator, because George Senator, there's something is wrong with everything connected to George Senator. I don't believe George Senator's his real name. His father's real name was Schumacher. And there are conflicting picture descriptions out there from the National Archives. And there are a couple pictures where the person who looks like George Senator is described is named Earl Ruby. But then there's another Earl Ruby who's named Earl Ruby, all in the National Archives. So they do this alias swapping. That's another thing I don't think most people realize, is that all the aliases that people hear are names of real people that these guys know and can prep when the cops come to talk to them. I've found at least 3 or 4 incidents of this in my JFK research. But yeah, these guys are all using shared names. They're not just making names up out of the blue.
It was much easier back then to create a false identity than it is now.
Yep.
All you needed was, Lee Harvey Oswald did it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It wasn't that hard to do.
I think the most well-known example is like the Jean Suetra, Michael Mertz, Michael Roux, through the triple alias in rotation thing, because
right.
There was no French hitman or French assassin. That's all play on words, because all these guys were connected to France because of the French connection, heroin trafficking. And so the claims of a French assassin is really just play on words, because all these guys had been a lot of them are shared assets, and they get sent overseas to do hits too. And so they're all connected to France in one way, shape, or form, right? Because of this heroin network. So yeah, there's no French assassin. That was just that was some literary kind of embellishment by whoever started that rumor.
Yeah, and one more thing to add too about the jacket you mentioned.
Yeah.
With the dry cleaning tag, that garment, that jacket, was actually made in California, which is where Larry Craver spent a bit of his time, where he was allegedly working with the San Francisco Mafia, and was forced to leave town, and he kind of worked some odd jobs on his way down through California before eventually making his way, to Dallas. So I understand, okay, Lee Harvey Oswald spent some time in California, before being sent over to Asugi and this, that, and the other. But, I think, why would he wouldn't have went out and bought a civilian jacket while in the Marine Corps? You know what I mean? I think that doesn't make any sense to me. It more than likely was Craver's jacket, and we can point to the label made in California by a certain maker. We can point to the dry cleaner tags and see the associations there. And, we even have photos of Larry Craver wearing almost an exact same style Eisenhower type short-waisted jacket from the FBI photos that we have of him. Oswald is never attributed to wearing that type of jacket or even being seen in that type of jacket.
Yep. And I've actually located 2 photos out of all of the Dealey Plaza and the railroad track photos. I have located 2 photos. Actually, one of them wasn't from a photo. One of them was from a video clip that was 4 seconds long, and I screenshotted it. But I found a guy who, you can't see his face, but he looks exactly like Larry Crawford wearing that jacket walking down the knoll. I found one from behind the knoll, and I found one as he's walking down the knoll. And there's a huge crowd of people there, right? I just happened to notice that the jacket that I was investigating the jacket, and when I saw that picture, I was like, wow, that looks exactly like the same jacket. So I might be able to the next couple of weeks like discern whether or not that actually was him that I found in the photographs. But yeah, so to kind of move on to Tippett a little bit and his involvement with Tippett, I'm pretty sure that he was the Oswald double who shot Tippett and then fled. Now, one aspect that most people don't really realize is that, they say Oswald dropped the jacket and it was in the parking lot of a gas station. Well, that's only like partially true because that parking lot backed up to the Abundant Life Temple, which people kind of address as the Abundant Life Church, which it was at one point. It's been several things over the years, but at the time, it was a temple. It was a Jewish temple. And I believe that it was a safe house. I think it was a safe house that could be utilized. So now I've come into some conflicting information in regards to that, because you've got whoever it was who made it a point to be seen at the shoe store and walking down the street. It definitely was not Oswald. Oswald was in the theater by 1:07 p.m. As per the guy who was working the concession stand, because he knew the movie started at like 1:10 and he knew that Oswald had walked in, before the movie started. So basically, you got Oswald. From what I can tell, Oswald was driven to the theater almost directly from Dealey Plaza, driven by a guy named Daryl Bo-Click, whose real identity is Travie Bo-Click. He was a Marine, a sharpshooter, and he died in a mysterious plane crash in 1967. But no one ever talks about Bo-Click. That's some like red belt level stuff, So Bo-Click, I'm still doing research. There's two different families of cliques in Dallas who are connected to the assassination, and I can't seem to connect the two families of cliques together. The genealogy records and all the find a grave stuff is very inconclusive. But you've got Bernice Click, who was visited by Jack Ruby, and you've got a bunch of people who are somehow associated with each other through these cliques in the assassination. This is just more of like the fine details. This doesn't really have much implication on the bigger picture. But
Daryl Click was mentioned by the
yeah, well, I think Daryl Click is Bo Click because his name was Travy, Travy Delano Click, and his nickname was Bo Click. But none of these guys, when these guys do mob stuff or they do CIA stuff, they get they have an operating name, which they go by. And Daryl Click might have been his operating name. Yeah,
because he was mentioned as the original cab driver for Oswald, and then that's very quickly shifted to William Wally.
Right. And which really, I don't even know who got
demise as well.
I don't even know who got into William Wally's cab because, he described him as wearing two jackets, you know what I mean? And his shirt had like a silver stripe on it. So it definitely wasn't Oswald. I don't really know if that was Craver or not. I don't know why Craver wouldn't have been driven. I don't see why he had to take public transportation, So there's some conflicting info there, but we know that Whaley was not the cab driver because I believe Curry, he in two different instances used two different references to Bo Click, and one he called him Bo Click and later said he said Oak Cliff, which he did not. And then at another time he named him Daryl Click, right? So he made two specific references to Bo Click. And so therefore, and the manner in which he said it told me that he was familiar with him. Like he was like one of the Dallas hoodlums or something like that. Right. So just the way that he talked about him gave me the impression that he was already familiar with him. But I have not seen, other than on a couple forums, anybody attempt to dive into who Daryl Click or Bo Click or Travie Click actually was. His father's name was Malachi Click, and he died in 1962. For a while, I thought there was a connection there, but I can't seem to make one. A lot of these things just end in dead ends. I mean, it's just, unless you're going to be pulling 10 generations of family records, a lot of this stuff is just hard to come across. And you really just got to cross-reference using like known descriptions from various incidents and various people, and then try to overlap those descriptions with identities, and then overlap those identities with known aliases. I mean, this thing was an absolute masterpiece of spycraft and obfuscation. Really, it's unbelievable the amount of tricks that all these guys had that they were employing to stay out of the narrative.
Oh yeah, for sure. Very interesting stuff, and you even made mention that, and it's something that I've heard before, and I even did a show on it too as well. Was Lee Harvey Oswald even staying at 1026 Beckley, or was it Craver, or was it another lookalike? I mean,
yeah, I looked into that briefly. I still have a little bit more digging to do, but I don't believe that Oswald ever stayed at 1026 North Beckley. So everyone says O.H. Lee was there, but that's not correct either. What you had was an H. Lee, Herbert Leon Lee,
Right.
who was staying in room O. And he was a very real person. There is some conflicting information on times he stayed there. Did he overlap with Oswald? There was another guy. I forget his name. Maybe, I don't think it was John Carter. It might have been. He had another guy who was staying there at the same time. And with the times that he said he was staying there, I think has been shown to be false, and that he was staying there the same time as Oswald. So 1026 North Beckley, you've got Earlene Roberts, and Earlene Roberts' sister was Bertha Cheek, who was also involved in this in some weird way with Jack Ruby. So basically, it seems like that was like a kind of a mafia CIA kind of safe house. Like people could stay there, and it was exactly what it was. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I don't remember. I get my cheeks and my clicks mixed up. But one of them had rented to like a bunch of Cubans, like in the months before the assassination. So like these places are safe houses, right? 1026 North Beckley, and what's the other one that was run by Mary Bledsoe? Mary Bledsoe, and the whole bus incident was a big old fabrication.
Yeah.
Like when I really got into that, like the thing that tipped it off for me was that freaking bus transfer was in mint condition, right? Like they ripped his buttons off his shirt. He, ripped a hole in his arm, but yet the bus transfer came out with a single crease on the back. Give me a break. And then the fact that the whole book of transfers disappeared. It's just insane. There's something to Cecil McWaters too. Cecil McWaters is somehow connected to the cliques. And Jack Ruby, and like everyone in place is connected to somebody. And like when you explain this stuff, and everyone's like, well, everyone couldn't have been in on it. Like, no, this was scripted like a Hollywood movie. This is what psychological warfare does. Psych warfare, and this was like all fall under George Joannides of the CIA at the JM Wave Station. In later years, he became the propaganda guy for the CIA. But in thinking about it and seeing how specific a lot of these encounters were that you come across in Kennedy, it was like there's no way that this stuff could have all been coincidental and happened at the same time. But all it takes is one guy to write a script and a couple guys to tell their people where to be and what to do, and you've got a Hollywood production that plays out just like Kennedy played out.
And even if these people don't realize their part in it per se, maybe even if they did realize it later. I mean, a lot of these guys were pawns. Keep their mouth shut,
Yeah. Like you don't ask questions when you're in the CIA or the mob. You don't ask questions. You do what you're told, or there are, you have a mysterious car accident. It's just kind of how it goes.
Yep.
So, as far as Tippett goes, it definitely wasn't Oswald. Oswald was in the theater already. Now the things that I'm unsure of are what were Emilia Santana and Sergio Arcacha Smith doing after the assassination, because I believe that they ended up on a plane, got down to Mexico City, and then made their way to Cuba, or stayed in Mexico City. There's a lot of things that happened. There's a lot of conflicting information on the Mexico City flights after the assassination. But you have stories of a private plane flying into Mexico City, a person getting off the plane, getting onto the Cubana Airlines flight, and then basically going right to the cockpit and staying in the cockpit the whole time until it got to Cuba, and hiding out the whole time, never left the cockpit. And right. they bypassed all the security, everything. Just got off one plane, got on another plane, and the plane took off.
Because the original plan, at least according to Marina, was that Oswald wanted to hijack a Cubana Airlines flight to Cuba after the assassination, or something to that effect.
Right. And then, years later, there actually was a bombing of a Cubana Airlines by Orlando Bosch. Right. He ended up blowing one up, like, I forget what year that was. But yeah, so you have a couple different stories here. You have the story of the one person getting on the plane and hiding in the cockpit. Then you have another story of two, quote, gangland types that flew from Mexico City to Cuba also. but I think there's some little disinformation there. I don't think if it was Sergio Arcacha Smith and Emilio Santana, they sure as hell were not going to Cuba. Right. They probably hid out in Mexico City for a while. But then you have Gilberto Lopez, right? Gilberto Lopez crossed the border into Mexico at like Brownsville or one of those cities on the border. And he had been connected to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee and basically had made statements in a previous meeting of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee about the president being assassinated and all this stuff. And he just coincidentally crosses the border that day. Here's a little side story, and I wish I could remember the guy's name. This is fascinating. Another person crossed the border into Texas after the assassination. And I'm going to have to look this up and talk about it on another show, but basically, this guy went on to be like the head of the Flower Child movement in San Francisco and credited with like putting on the first concerts for like the Grateful Dead and all this stuff in the 1960s. Big time like hippie guy. But I found out he was also connected to MK Ultra and the CIA, and he fled into Mexico after the assassination. So there's some really weird, interesting. That's totally side note, probably irrelevant, but that was just another weird connection I found.
Was it Ken Kesey?
No, it wasn't Ken Kesey, man. If I heard the name, it's probably in my notes somewhere. I'll have to look at it. But it's if you look at the FBI JFK files, it's broken into 16 2,000-page files. It's in the first file of the 16.
Interesting.
So I'll pull that information out and I'll get it to you. But yeah, so you had a bunch of people getting down to Mexico, but then you have a bunch of people who, you had Crawford go to Detroit. And in my opinion, you had probably the real George Senator, who was probably always in New York the whole time, or it was Earl Ruby, and he went back to Detroit also, right? So you've got the movement to Detroit there. Then you've got the interesting case of David Leon Miller and his brother Isidore Max Miller. That's a pretty fascinating story. I haven't gotten to the bottom of that one yet, but based on all the descriptions and the connections to other mob guys, I'm convinced that David Leon Miller is Dave Yaris, and that Isidore Max Miller is actually Lenny Patrick. So these two guys were living in a house that I believe the landlord was connected to Oswald. It was either Earlene Roberts, or her sister, but somebody had somebody was renting to these guys, and these guys were in the Carousel Club all the time. And I'm convinced that these two guys were Dave Yaris and Lenny Patrick. So you have the phone call the night before to Robert Bernard Baker in Chicago, and then Baker calls Yaris, and then Yaris calls Patrick. And this was all, in my opinion, obfuscation. Those guys were in Dealey Plaza, including Robert Baker, and those were alibi phone calls. Because if you go back and look at these guys' history, these guys have been busted by doing dumb shit with phones. That's why they always were going to pay phones up the road. They knew the deal. They set themselves an alibi by that chain of calls that happened.
Yeah, they knew phone records could be pulled, and there you go. What better way to place yourself somewhere than to make a call from there? Right.
And now let's go back to the Mob Israel connection. So now you've got Jack Ruby, definitely worked with the Mossad before they were the Mossad. He was working with Israeli interests through Herman Greenspun and a bunch of these other guys, Menachem Begin directly. And so you had Jack Ruby working with pre-Israeli Jews. And then you have Dave Yaris and Lenny Patrick, who were both Jewish, who had changed their names to sound more American. And these guys, while yes, they were mobsters and loyal to their chain of command, they always felt compelled to participate in pro-Israel things. I mean, Lenny Patrick and Dave Yaris had both flown to Israel numerous times in the years leading up to the Kennedy assassination. They had connections directly over there. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were even, the shared assets that were, used as hitmen over there. It would make perfect sense. I mean, when you look at the OAS in France, like all the guys that they were getting hired were all military, and they were all involved in the French mafia, right? So it's I don't think it'd be any different. The mafia here connected to the intelligence and communities and the governments. I think it's just the same thing, and then we would probably send people all over the world at the time using mafia guys to do it. The Jewish mafia guys in particular, so that was very important to Menachem Begin and these guys, that they had quote their own people, implementing these things so as to keep it a small circle, because they kind of saw it as all Jews are loyal to each other. That was like kind of their thing, really. But it's not the Jews, as we know now, it's Zionists, not Jews. So
right. Also interesting to note, Jack Ruby after he was caught, he was very worried about how people would view the Jewish people because he was Jewish and he did what he did.
Yeah,
and
he almost gave it away by saying it so many times. You know what I mean? It was kind of
he
like
went back to the whole Jewish thing a lot, especially when he was questioned by Earl Warren, and in various statements made to the press, he was very concerned about how Jewish people in general and Jewish Americans would be viewed in light of what he had done, so it makes sense.
Yeah. See, Jack Ruby seemed so mysterious to a lot of people because yes, he was working with the mob, but he wasn't a made guy because he wasn't Italian. Jack Ruby is actually connected to the White Russians. I mean, he really technically is a White Russian. He I think he says he was born in the U.S., but there's a chance that he wasn't. He might have been born over in the Ukraine or I forget where I read, but his dad was definitely Russian. He was a Russian Jew connected to the White Russians. So That's another connection between like him and de Mohrenschildt in Dallas, right? Me personally, I despise identitarian politics at all. Like identitarian politics have screwed up the world more than anything else. Period. We're all one people. We got to live with each other. Like to me, I don't have any. I don't see any difference between us. Really, I don't. But like a lot of people, they have this pride in their heritage and things like race or whatever. And to me, that's one of the bigger problems that we face in the world is that people can't get over this kind of stuff. And the loyalties that some of these groups kind of command to some degree is like, it prevents us from really all being able to get along. And that's an unfortunate truth of the situation. But there was a lot of loyalty by Jack Ruby, especially to Judaism and to other people who had fled Europe at the time from the Nazis. So he was definitely into the smuggling of Jews to Gaveston after the war, or actually during the war. So his political, people say that Jack Ruby wasn't overly political. That might have been true on one level, but on other levels, he was deeply involved with political stuff.
Oh yeah, and worried about it too. So let's back to Dealey Plaza, because I know you wanted to get into the identifications of the folks in Dealey Plaza, like Dark Complected Man, the Umbrella Man, and other people seen around there that you've identified.
Sure. So really the one I think is the most important is Larry Floor. I believe Larry Floor is Ted Shackley. Now people I've read on forums, I will give the whole history of Larry Floor, and they are correct in what they say. However, they don't realize the shared asset, the shared alias kind of modus operandi that these guys utilize. If you look at a picture of Ted Shackley circa 1960 to 1965, that looks exactly like Larry Floor. Now, how did Larry Floor give himself away? There's one way that I haven't seen anybody else pick up on, but Larry Floor said that when he was interviewed, he said that he was at lunch with a guy named Richard Bartholomew, who I really can't find anything on, and that he had heard about the assassination and was just a couple blocks away, and he walked to Dealey Plaza. The problem with his story is that his employer he gave as S.L. Ewing Company, which is definitely a CIA front company. If you look into S.L. Ewing, and then you look into who S.L. Ewing was, they seem to have nothing to do with each other, and there's weird shit going on there. So he gave his work phone number as, whatever phone number it was. And as I was cross-referencing phone numbers, one other person gave that phone number. And the one person who gave that phone number as their own phone number is a guy named Louis Shug, S-C-H-U-G. There is not one word about Louis Shug on any document, not FBI, not CIA, nothing. This guy is the ghost of the entire assassination. There is nothing on this guy. And I've been looking. I can't find a reference. I found people on forums going, who the hell is this guy? And that is it. He gave the same phone number as his phone number, the phone number to the S.L. Ewing Company. So that tells me right away that he is somehow connected to Larry Floor, since they're giving the same work phone number. But that kind of confirms my suspicions that S.L. Ewing was intelligence. And that also tells me that Larry Floor is not Larry Floor. And if he's not Larry Floor and he looks like Ted Shackley, it's Ted Shackley. There are also pictures in Dealey Plaza that look like George Joanitas.
Holy shit. I just Googled pictures of Ted Shackley and Larry Floor.
Mm-hmm.
Goddamn, they do look alike.
That's the same guy, yeah. The ages seem off, but Ted Shackley he looked young. He maintained his youthful appearance. We talked about Ted Shackley and Reinhard Galen and all the shit that he did. Ted Shackley was he was so central in creating the security state that we live in today. And his story doesn't make sense. And look at what he's wearing underneath his long jacket.
Yeah.
He's wearing a plaid jacket. So if someone put me on the spot and had told me call it right now, I'd say that Ted Shackley was the number 2 shooter on the grassy knoll, but he did not fire a shot. I believe the other man on the knoll fired the shot, but Ted Shackley was there. You see, because when Larry Floor got busted, he got busted coming out of the Daltex building, which I'm convinced there was a cutout in the Daltex building. There was some place that they can go and hide out until they got a signal that it was all clear or something like that, right? So,
yep.
And so you've got these witnesses up in the Daltex building who see Larry Floor downstairs, out of the building, and they see a cop and they start banging on the window, and they point out to the cop. They're pointing at Larry Floor, and that's when Larry Floor goes and gets picked up. And
wasn't he acting drunk? Was that the one?
Yep, he was acting drunk. And if you'll notice, there's about 3 or 4 guys who were stopped in Dealey Plaza, and they're all drunk. That's more spycraft stuff. Oh, we couldn't have done it. He was drunk. No, they'll shoot the guy and then, slam, 6, 7 shots worth of alcohol, and it'll be heavily fresh on their breath. Heavily. You know what I mean? The getting drunk stuff is definitely some spycraft. Anybody who you read about in Dealey Plaza who was drunk, they were in on it. I found another reference, and this is the one reference that I'm trying to corroborate and find more evidence on it, but somebody had contacted the Dallas Police Department in reference to there's talk of a second suspect, like a serious second suspect. And while most of the stories about Larry Floor say he was released later that day, I found one reference that said he was kept in jail for over 3 weeks, and that he was the second suspect that they held on to. But this was it would have been 2.5 weeks after Oswald was killed. And I think they were digging hard to find out what this guy was doing and the story of what he actually did. And, nobody knows. All we know is he got arrested because he tried to go find a phone in the Daltex building. But what the witnesses who were banging on the glass and got the cops' attention, they must have told them something very different. And who knows what that was. But so based on the totality of circumstance, I'm convinced that that's Ted Shackley. And remember, because all these guys, I believe all those guys were in Dealey Plaza. I believe, Bill Harvey was there because Bill Harvey was stationed over in Italy. And I think a couple of days before the assassination, he was going out of town. One of his associates over there said, "Where are you going?" He's like, "Oh, I'm going to Dallas to see what happens." Right. So you got Bill Harvey in Dallas. If you have Bill Harvey and you have Ted Shackley, and I have a photo of a guy who looks like George Joanitas, it's probably George Joanitas. And I think I've identified Morales in Dealey Plaza. So that we'll get into right now. So if you look at the Zapruder film, you will see as the car passes into view in front of the knoll, you'll see a guy wearing an apron, and you'll see him talking to another guy who is taller, heavier set, and darker skinned. Now, the guy who was wearing the apron, he based on a chain of incidents and events and people, I've been led to determine that is most likely James Licavoli. The apron man is probably James Licavoli. James Licavoli is a Cleveland mob guy. He was the number 2 guy under John Scalish. He took over Cleveland after Scalish either went to jail or died or retired or something. But Licavoli was a brutal guy. I remember reading a quote that said, if Licavoli tapped his cane, somebody died, and that's just how it was. And that should kind of give you the idea that he really was he was the epitome of the Italian mobster, right? So for him to go to Dealey Plaza, stand in the very front, and wear a freaking apron, that was his way of saying "fuck you." Oh, you can cut that part out, but that was what he was doing.
All right.
He was giving the finger to Kennedy. by wearing an apron there. And what led me to him was a guy named Leo Masseri. Leo Masseri was another Cleveland hitman. He was related to Licavoli, but all these guys are cousins or, whatever. So he was a cousin of Licavoli. He was connected to a guy named Angelo Leonardo, who was a Cleveland mobster also. Angelo Leonardo's cousin is Frank Sinatra. And Frank Sinatra's best friend was Angelo DiCarlo up in New Jersey. And one of DiCarlo's best friends was Tony Provenzano. So you got this loop here of people who are really tight. The chain would seem to connect to the shipment of the rifles. And Leo Masseri, now the reason that I say Leo Masseri led me to James Licavoli as being the apron man is because I am about 95% confident that Leo Masseri is the old tramp. The only thing that throws me off is I can't find pictures of – there's only 4 pictures that exist of Leo Masseri, and they're all booking photos. And I can't – I have concerns over the hairline of the old tramp, but based on what I've seen, based on scarring under the eye, I'm 95% sure that the old tramp is Leo Masseri. But I will, if I am wrong, I will definitely own up to it. So, and if that is Leo Masseri, his boss was James Licavoli, and James Licavoli was an arrogant guy to the point where he's not going to let everybody else have the fun and not go see this thing for himself. If you notice, and not in one document, they mentioned the guy with the apron, and he's standing right there, And so there is, there's another. Okay, so I'm going to talk about another incident in Dealey Plaza that connects all these guys, and that is the picking up of a suspect from Dealey Plaza in the station wagon allegedly owned by Mary Farrell. Mary Farrell is a CIA disinformation agent who runs the Mary Farrell website. I try to avoid her site at all costs unless I absolutely have to for a document. See, that's a situation where she'll flood you with documents so you don't find the right ones. That's what her site does. Because 90% of the documents on her site are junk, have nothing to do with anything, rehashes of rehashes of rehashes. And so the real nuggets of information I don't think you're going to find there. You're going to find those at the archives if you find them anywhere. So, but her husband, Buck Farrell, is also CIA agent. Every single request, Freedom of Information Act request for his documents have just gotten a big no. So he's somehow connected to NASA and some of the things that NASA was doing. That's a whole nother road I need to go down at some point. But yeah, they're both hardcore CIA. She started to collect information and start doing stuff the day of the assassination. Like, it's really weird how that worked out. But so her vehicle was allegedly driven by General McHugh, and Chester Clifton, the other general, was the guy in the passenger seat, allegedly. And the guy in the back seat was supposed to have been the press agent, Julian Reed, the press agent for Conley. So finally, after months of digging, I completely debunked that. That was so Reed was Red, R-E-A-D-E. He was actually in the press bus, so it was not him getting in or out of that vehicle. And in that vehicle, in that photograph, you can see that vehicle and you can see the apron man pretty clearly walking away, and you see the press bus behind it. But it's this station wagon, which was a Mercury Colony station wagon, 1964. I haven't been able to corroborate it with any of the other vehicles involved, any of the other station wagons involved or ownership. I'm still working on it. I got to make like a grid chart and like just and track all this stuff. But so
they all kind of look the same back then. As station wagons.
Right, and there's some license plate switching going on. With the tippet shooting, there's a gray Plymouth, and which came back to Carl Weathers, who worked for Collins Radio, which was the CIA company. They get out of there and they swap license plates, and not only do they swap license plates, they swap cars. A lot of the cars described that Ruth Payne had owned, she didn't own. The Green Rambo station wagon that was at her place was Clay Shaw's station wagon. So these guys swap vehicles and swap license plates as part of their spycraft stuff. So the whole station wagon thing is crazy. I'm going to have to really spend some time deciphering it. But yeah, so you got 2 people in a car, and they're basically they're picking up a third person in the car. Now, if I am correct, this is all dependent upon if I am correct about this chain of events. Then if that is James Licavoli in the apron, the guy talking to him was heavy set and darker skinned, and Licavoli was a Sicilian. He had dark skin to begin with. You're like either black or dark skinned Hispanic if you're darker than him. And the guy who got into that car, if it was driven by McHugh and Chester Clifton, These guys are the Joint Chiefs of Staff. These guys are the upper echelon of our military establishment. They're not stopping to pick up a nobody. They're not going to stop and pick up anybody unless they're up there on that level with them. And the only person that matches the description of that person who gets into the vehicle and who would be as important enough to be picked up is David Morales. Now, that is a leap I'm taking, but I can't think of anything else that makes sense. The only other thing that would make sense is if it wasn't McHugh and it wasn't Chester Clifton in that car. But whoever it was talking to Licavoli before they got into that station wagon. So whoever it was connected to them and in on it on some level. And the guy's wearing a long trench coat and he's got a hat on. So basically that vehicle was used to escort one of the conspirators out of Dealey Plaza. And whoever took that picture, I forget which series it was, whether it was Hughes or whoever, that is the most important photo in all of Dealey Plaza right there. That one photo of the apron man walking away with this guy getting into the station wagon, because the official government documentation says that was Julian Reed, and it sure as hell wasn't, because Reed said he was in the press bus. Although, this is another little aside that I need to still research further. I had read an interview with someone, I forget who it was. They weren't a real big shot in government, but they said that they felt like they got shafted because they got bumped to the VIP car, him and Evelyn Kennedy, or what was it? Evelyn Lincoln, who was Kennedy's secretary. I read an interview that said that the two of them were in the VIP car, but I highly doubt that they are stopping in Dealey Plaza to pick up a conspirator. You know what I mean? It was so far removed from anyone who had been involved that I still need to figure out if there was a second VIP car or what they were talking about. But the motorcade is all kinds of screwed up.
And just to be clear, folks, this is not the Roger Craig guy getting into the Nash Rambler. This is something different.
Yes, and I don't believe that was a Nash Rambler that day. I believe it was another model. That's why people can't find it.
Station wagon, yeah.
Yeah, he only thought it was a Nash because it had the roof racks, but I found a bunch of other models that had roof racks, and there's really no good enough pictures of that station wagon to determine who that was. And see, that station wagon throws me for a loop. It really does, because I can't. You have three people who possibly are involved in the Tippett incident or fleeing Dealey Plaza. You got William Seymour. If it was Craver who shot Tippett, you still got Emilio Santana and William Seymour to account for. And some people speculate that it was William Seymour who got arrested out of the balcony of the Texas Theater and taken out the back, right? So, but that I'm still unsure. This is one area that I still need to dig deeper into. But digging deeper into this still does not affect the premise or the bigger picture of who gave the order, who facilitated it, and who carried it out, right? So you can still figure out who did what and ignore some of the minutia. You know what I mean? The minutia.
And I always thought, it could have been Crayford as well, who was arrested out of the balcony and taken out the back.
It could have been. And it could have been, but I did read
turn loose,
But I did read somewhere that it was the next day that person hid out for overnight, and the next day they were picked up and driven to Galveston. So that I'm still trying to correlate with everything else.
Yeah, well, that would eliminate Crayford's. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these are interesting nuances, right? These are like, well, what was that happening there? It fills in a curiosity, but it definitely doesn't impact the fact that it was the Chicago outfit pulling the triggers, nobody else, no anti-Castro Cubans or none of that stuff, and definitely that Israel gave the order, right? So you can have the who gave the order, and you can have who pulled the trigger. And everything else in the middle, really, it's fascinating. It's interesting. It plays a role to help explain the bigger picture. But there really is enough evidence to kind of understand exactly what happened without the minutia, really. And my associate, who I'll call Mr. Y, he ignores minutia. He made a statement to me once, and he was completely correct. You can ignore every single thing that happened in Dealey Plaza that day. All of it. Don't look at one bit of it and still know who gave the order and who pulled the trigger. And he's correct in saying that, so it's hard not to get distracted by some of this stuff and thinking it's going to lead you to some big wow. But really it doesn't. And it's just for filling in gaps. So Mr. Y has actual documents that confirm his theories of who was on the NOLA and who the shooters were. I'm not there yet. I haven't found the actual documentary proof. I'm at the stage where I have deduced everything from cross-referencing documents and all that investigative stuff. I was a cop for 9 years. I have a lot of experience in investigations. I think a lot of people will have evidence that they don't realize is evidence. You know, I just kind of look at evidence in a different way. So, but yeah, all this little stuff, all the little minutia is, to me, probably going to absorb a huge chunk of the rest of my life, you know? And I love it. But really, none of it will change the bigger picture, you know? And I think that's the most important thing. Understanding what's going on in our world today is paramount for everybody, or it should be. And you can't understand what's going on in the world today unless you understand Kennedy. I mean, I'm 100% convinced of that. And hopefully we're entering into a new phase of Kennedy awareness. Hopefully, information regards to Israel can continue to spread. The involvement with the mafia, because that uncovers the greater relationship between the establishment powers and the criminal underworld, which is still persisting to this day. You know, It hasn't changed. So when you come to understand Kennedy, you come to understand the state of our world. And that's next. I got to move into aliens so they can beam me up and get me the hell out of here. So,
well, tell them to. When after they get you in and grab me up too, I'm ready to get the hell out of here myself.
Yes. I mean, on a serious note, I'm looking to I'm looking to make $1 million and then dip to Thailand. I got 12 years. You can retire there at 55 and live on a hut on the beach and not have to worry about any of this stuff anymore. So
there you go. That sounds like a plan. Well, just to rewind real quick. Speaking of minutia and Dealey Plaza, get to your identification of Umbrella Man and Dark Complected Man, because I think it's important.
Okay, so I don't want to identify the Dark Complected Man because I feel like I was helped and the person who actually did the work should be credited.
Right.
And so I'm going to have to hold off on that one, but we'll talk about
generally who this guy was as a person. Yeah.
Sure. Both the Umbrella Man and the Dark Complected Man. And the Dark Complected Man is not a Cuban. Okay. He's definitely not a Cuban, so people can stop calling him that. They were Mossad assassination coordinators. And the Umbrella Man was a guy named Michael Harari. And Michael Harari at the time was stationed down in Panama. And Panama was ultra important in the global heroin trafficking that had been set up by guys like Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin and these guys were real terrorists, and they funded everything through narcotics money and human trafficking and weapons. That's just what they did. Panama was also directly connected to George Bush because that's where a lot of the cocaine at the time was coming from, and a lot of money laundering was going on down there. So you've got Manuel Noriega, right? And Manuel Noriega's alleged right-hand guy was Michael Harari. And Michael Harari has been connected to virtually every assassination that Mossad's ever done since the 1960s, if you do your homework on him. There is zero possibility that there was a Mossad hit in Dealey Plaza that Menachem Begin, Yitzhak Rabin, and Yitzhak Shamir were at that Michael Harari was not at. I'm really getting tired of hearing how it was Roy Hargraves and what's his name. Those guys were in Miami at the time. People can stop saying that. So do your homework on Michael Harari, and you can read about Michael Harari a little bit in Michael Collins Piper's book. And the only reason I feel comfortable talking about him is because Collins Piper has already brought this up. So, I'll tell you this much: the Dark Complected Man, who was not a Cuban, did not know Michael Harari. He just knew he would be there with another associate, but. The Dark Complected Man goes on to play an extremely significant role in covert actions around the world on behalf of the Mossad and CIA in the years after that, and he's directly connected to George Bush. So those are the only hints I'm going to give on him. But they could potentially be key to get people to acknowledge the Israeli role, because people are looking for those guys to be like anti-Castro Cubans or connected to the mob, and they're not in that group. They're in a completely different group, you know? That's why nobody's really been able to make the connection on that. And the reason they had an umbrella and a guy with a radio is because you need a physical backup. If your radio goes out, you need a guy who has some way to signal to the shooters some kind of message in case the radio fails. That's why you have to have two guys. Right. So that's pretty much how that worked. Nobody knows who this guy is. Like, nobody listening will have heard the name of the dark complected man. That one's going to take some homework. Right, but I would start in Panama with George Bush and Michael Harari, and that might lead you there.
Gotcha. Now, have you looked at all? I mean, we've talked about, he's kind of the godfather of this theory, Michael Collins Piper, in his book Final Judgment. Have you looked at all into his untimely demise?
Oh, of course, they killed him. I mean, there's just no question. This information, which has been out since at minimum when he wrote his book. He goes deep into the Dallas community. He talks about the Bronfman family and Sam Bloom, and there's people don't realize how entrenched the pre-Israeli Zionist connections were in Dallas. They were deep and they were thick. And they were, more irreligious Jews. They were not Orthodox. They were Zionists for sure. But the entrenchment of them in Dallas was thick. I mean, big time. They had their hands in everything. I mean, even the mayor of Dallas was a CIA agent, they were all connected. And Collins Piper really dives deep into that. You'll have a firm understanding of the atmosphere in Dallas once you read Final Judgment. It's the best book on the assassination that's ever been written, and it's the only one that really tries to target the big picture of what happened and not focus and get lost in the weeds.
Yeah, and also the only one whose author pretty much met an untimely demise.
Yeah, they killed him. I mean,
it says the deputy coroner's report stated that the cause of death was a probable myocardial infarction.
Yes,
ischemic cardiomyopathy and coronary artery disease. Now, he was only 54 years old, and from what I've seen, in fairly good health. I mean, he wasn't some giant 400-pound dude, you know what I mean? Is it possible he could have had a natural death? Sure. But it when you look at everything that he was talking about, it just seems, like you said, very, very odd to me. And it seems to me like he was taken out. Yeah.
I 100% believe that. You're not allowed to shake the tree. And if he was wrong, they wouldn't have wasted their time. He'd be alive today. If he was wrong, he'd be alive. But he wasn't wrong. He nailed it. And the really for me, what I found more fascinating than anything was how did this come about that we have this country that can go around the world whacking people, and why are they doing it? And that's really where I'm at with my research now. Is that took me on a dive through World War II and the Holocaust and let me tell you this, nothing anyone believes about World War II is true, period. It was the introduction of psychological warfare by the OSS in 1941, who had been piggybacking on the Russian propaganda, which had started in 1939. I'm not going to go into details, but trust me when I tell you, absolutely nothing anyone has been taught about World War II is true at all.
I agree.
And I had to, and to understand that you have to go back into World War I, and to understand that you got to dive way deeper into the mid 1800s, so history to me, I really wish I'd discovered the joys of history like 10 years ago, but it is, there's so much information out there if you want to understand the state of the current world. That it genuinely will take you a lifetime of research on like hours a day of research. No joke. Fortunately, I work for myself. I can get my work done in a couple hours, and then I'm glued to documents and history books. And I have a feeling it's not going to let up anytime soon. But to really understand the state of the world, like I said, you got to know Kennedy, you got to know World War. You have to know our history for at least the last 150 years. Hell, you could probably take it back to the American Revolution, and. But on a bigger picture of things, we are so screwed on a global level that I'm scared out of my wits for real. And our government is all in on what's happening in the world. We're done, man. We're toast. We haven't had a real president since Kennedy. But the ironic part is that Kennedy stole that election from Nixon, But the only difference is
the mob helped him do it.
Yeah, and that's why they felt betrayed, But really, if they would have had Nixon in place, Nixon was their guy. Nixon was
Right.
controlled. He was a puppet. If they'd have gotten Nixon instead of Kennedy, we'd be in the same situation today. So there's really, that's why the assassination is so important. That was the moment that we lost our country. 100%. Everybody in it, everybody running the show now is in on this New World Order Zionist crap. They really are. We're done. We're toast. The CIA basically won the war for them by replacing everybody in government. Every part of government got infiltrated by the CIA. Every single aspect. And hell, I'm even starting to think that going back to Al Capone. This is my own theory. I haven't read this anywhere, but I'm starting to think Al Capone, the whole thing about taxes was just a front. I think he was going to be a force to stop the Israeli takeover of the mob. And so I think that's why the whole case was set up against him. Because you got to think the guys who were involved, who put that case on above Elliot Ness, you had Malachi Harney, who went on to be a long time government operative. He was connected to George White, and he was connected to Anslinger, and he was connected to Charles Siragusa. He was connected to all these guys who were directly connected to Angleton. You know what I mean? So this whole thing might have started way, way back. They might have even just taken out Al Capone to pave the way for them to take over, because you can't take over a country unless you take over its underworld. That is a necessary step in subverting a government, because they're the muscle. They're the muscle of the government domestically, or at least they were. I don't know how that is today. I haven't studied the mob today. They seem like they're gone, but they're really not. We just had that like $1 billion cocaine bust. That was another mob CIA connected thing, and there was another one that happened where they got a bunch of cocaine off of like a JP Morgan boat or something like. I mean, these guys are still doing the same shit. Nothing has changed. The relationships between the governments and the mafia and the drugs and it's all the same, and it all needs to end. That's why people need to understand everything that's going on with Kennedy, because this is what we're left with. We're left with this legacy,
Yeah, for sure. And we know the CIA's behind all the drug trafficking, and the FBI is finally, of course they went hard, back in the 80s and early 90s against the mafia to try and stamp them out a little bit, because maybe they were getting a little too big for their britches, and maybe cutting the CIA out a little bit when they should have been knowing their role as second in command there. But like you said, nobody really talks about the mafia anymore, but we know they're there. We know what they're doing. And as long as there's good and evil in this world, I mean, that's just the way it's going to be,
Yeah. The narrative that, America's the good guys and everyone else is the bad guys, that was like a direct result of everything that we've been talking about going back to pre-World War II. And it's a myth. We are the bad guys. Like, America is the only nation on earth that's actively, in offensive wars in 7 countries and supports nations who, openly murder journalists and children. And I mean, we are partnered with the worst of the worst on planet Earth with Saudi Arabia and Israel. We really are. And the only reason for it is because we are living in a world governed by the remnants of the Nazis through the training and establishment of the security state set in place by Reinhard Gehlen and Ted Shackley, who was arrested in Dealey fucking Plaza. Oh, sorry again. But, I mean, it is really appalling. And I'm not going to take this lying down anymore. I'm going to hopefully at some point I'll write a book about something or try to get the word out somehow, maybe make a movie. But yeah, that's
because nowadays, I mean, they've successfully brainwashed most of America into thinking this way, that we're this great nation and freedom and democracy reign, and but we're just open air slaves to the system. Who we're just, and we're the terrorists, we're the bad guy, and nobody seems to see it except everybody. The rest of the world sees it, of course. And of course our allies try to portray us in a somewhat decent light, but all of these countries that we have these supposed wars against, and this, that, and the other, we're the aggressor. Sure, they're going to hate us. If a terrorist comes over here and tries to blow us up, I think they probably have a damn good reason for doing it, because probably killed their family.
That's the thing. Like, I'm really like, I'm like personally offended by our framing of Islam and Muslims as the root of all terrorism. I mean, like, it's just blatantly not true. 9/11, I mean, this directly connects to 9/11. It directly connects to Watergate. Watergate was not about bugging the freaking Democratic office. It was about uncovering information on Hank Greenspun, who had the names of the shooters and wrote a letter to somebody with the names of the shooters in it. The Hank Greenspun letter, I have not been able to locate the letter itself, but I've read a lot of commentary on the letter. You want to know who all the shooters were, like 100%, we got to get that Hank Greenspun letter. That Hank Greenspun letter was the root of Watergate. And hopefully we can get that information out to the general public. But the problem is, even for people who are learned in this stuff, some of the realizations are so hard to really wrap your head around and accept. Like the average Joe Schmo, well, I don't know if they could ever comprehend this stuff, right? I really don't. And the takeover has been so slow and subtle that most people don't realize. But see, lately, I think Israel's been overplaying their hand. This censorship stuff that's going on is out of control. Out of control. It's this kind of financial censorship as well as informational censorship that has led the world to create decentralization in technology, right? To create things like Bitcoin or to create things like BitTorrent so that information can be transferred and you don't have to depend on a single central carrier, right? So, yeah, it's pretty.
Most people have no idea what the hell is going on. I mean, really?
No, even guys on the news. You watch news. You watch our newscasters who are all, Op Mockingbird, and
they're all told what to say. They all say the same thing.
Yeah,
we've all seen the videos. Where you have like 20 different local news station, word for word, giving you the exact same stories. I mean, come on.
And see, so Nancy Pelosi got in trouble like a couple of years ago because she talked about the wrap-up smear. A wrap-up smear, she basically said, is you make up a bunch of falsehoods and then you put it on somebody, and then you get the press to report those falsehoods, and then you have a vindication by the press because you can say, see, the press printed this, and then you merchandise the press report of the smears that you initiated in the first place that are blatantly false. That's called a wrap-up smear, and that particular technique seems to be the only technique they're using, because all these people are saying, oh, they're the bad ones, they're doing this. That's what we're doing, right? So basically you take your greatest weakness and you project it onto your opponent and then you merchandise it. And that's what gets, everyone to believe that what you're saying is correct. Nancy Pelosi saying that I thought was just great. That was because she basically spilled the beans on like how governments operate informationally. Yeah, so everything that we're told is a lie. Like independent media shows like this really they need as much help as they can get, because you're not going to get information like this on any show, and so many independent content producers are just being banned. And so I'm going to be launching a show coming up on debunking police work and all the lies that cops tell. I was a cop for a long time, and so I don't even know if I want to go on YouTube. I think I just want to use some of these decentralized platforms to get the information out, because then I know it won't get shut down. But all the censorship and everything that's going on in the world today is directly tied back to Israel, 100%. And we are an Israeli colony, pretty much, is what it comes down to.
Yes, I agree. All right, Mr. X, I think we covered a lot today, and do you think we got it all out?
Oh, definitely not. We're going to have to do this a couple more times.
Okay.
But no, realistically, I could talk about Kennedy I could probably do 100 hour-long episodes and not double back over the same information because of how it branches out so much. And then there's like nitty-gritty little specific things that are just interesting, there's plenty to talk about when it comes to the minutia, but I think we did a good job of getting the overall big picture. I mean, we know who gave the order. We know who facilitated it. We know more or less that it was the Chicago Outfit Murder Inc. who pulled the triggers, and we explained the relationship of all these groupings and how they interact together and how they're not really different organizations. So yeah, I think we pretty much did a good job of getting all this info out.
Good. Well, hopefully the people listened and took it all in and paid attention, because it's important. I felt it was important. That's why I wanted to have you on the show, get this out there, and I understand the need for anonymity. This is dangerous shit when you start talking about, the real truth of what happened. I mean, you see what happens to certain people involved in the Kennedy assassination when they have knowledge of certain things. They end up dead.
Yeah, but also these days with technology, I am 100% convinced that they're planting child porn on people's computers to lock them up. I believe that that's just the newest technique of silencing people. Anytime you go look at the list of people who've been busted with child porn on their computers who were involved in some sort of government stuff, it's off the chain. That's
Hello,
another thing.
Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah. They're working with Jeffrey Epstein, and then they're planting child porn on people's computers to silence them. I mean, that's just the latest thing. So I'm not going to have a car crash. I don't have any child porn. I'm not sick. Anything happens to me, you know what happened, all right?
No worries, man. All right, well, we will definitely have you back on the show for more. Thank you so much, Mr. X, for coming on and going through all this with us. I really appreciate it.
Hey, man, I had a good time, and I'll definitely be back one day, sure. All
right, Mr. X, you hang tight for me, folks. If you enjoyed the show, please let me know, okay? The Lone Gunman Podcast at gmail.com, on Twitter at The Lone Gunman 7. All right, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of feedback from these 2 episodes with Mr. X. So bring it on. I'm ready. We'll help you get there. No worries, folks. All right, until the next time, stay tuned. This is your boy. Peace.